Hello everybody and welcome to the Sims History channel, where today we're going to be creeping up on some nuns. By the end of this two-part series, you'll know a lot about the Catholic Church and its role in society during the Middle Ages and Renaissance. We'll be going back to 17th century France to follow some nuns as they search for properties to turn into a convent school, which was a completely new kind of school at the time. And then we're going to go back and check out their renovation. By the way, at the time the sisters were doing this, they were not just defying convention, they were actually really upsetting the social hierarchy, which actually nuns and sisters kind of tend to do a lot. The nuns we're following are actually the Ursuline Sisters, an order I chose for two reasons. First, I work for them. No need to say more. And second, and way more important from your perspective, from the late 1500s until the French Revolution in 1789, the Ursulines were the order for educating French girls, which makes them very important for our ongoing series of simulations of So the first sim that we're going to be looking at is Margarita Drouot, who is the one that I made in the historical Create a Sim episode, if you watched that. I did have to put her in black instead of the white that she was wearing before, and there'll be a link to all the CC content in here in the comment section of the video. All the Ursulines had a black habit, and then they wore a white piece around the face and a black piece over that, and I've put together the best approximation that I can of it. I did have to take away poor Marguerite's fancy formal outfit, but I did leave her her little pink shoes that she snuck in, so she does get to keep a tiny bit of her personality. She is joined by Sister Louise Dano, and as you can see, Louise is dressed exactly the same way she is. And these two women are regular. Next we have Louise's female sibling Lucrece Dano, and Lucrece is the mistress of novices, which you can tell because I've put her in a slightly different outfit. She's wearing actually an Edwardian dress, but it's the right length and it's pretty modest, and it helps to tell her apart from the other sisters. The mistress of novices, or the master of novices if you're dealing with monks, is the person in charge of teaching the beginning nuns how to actually act like a nun, how to live in the community, how to be the person that you're striving to become to be. She is followed up by Sister Drouot's female sibling, Jacqueline, who is our postulant. You have to have a period of waiting before you're allowed to take final vows, and during that period, in most orders, you would have dressed differently than the other sisters. So here she is, Jacqueline, and with no further ado, let us go on to look at the wonderful monastery that they're going to examine first. And again, this one was created by Simdells. That's their origin ID if you're a simmer and want to get their material, if you want to go download it after you see this. And it is under, you can also find it under #monastery. So here it is. And as you can see, it is quite lovely. It is large. It sits on a 50 by 50 lot. So simmers don't have very many of those to work with, but you can see it has the church attached, quite a large one. It has a beautiful little garden there because medieval monks would have had an interior garden. It has a fountain which you could use to simulate the well that a medieval set of monks would have had, although of course modern ones have perfectly adequate plumbing. And it has towers on the edges of the gates, and it has a large, heavy wall. And these heavy walls, these big, thick walls, serve a couple of purposes. One of them is to provide privacy and a sense of enclosure and separation from the world. But in the Middle Ages, it's also they also were defensive. Monasteries and convents are filled with books and treasures, and in the case of convents, virginal women. so they were the targets of thieves during the Middle Ages. Anyway, let's take a look at the interior of this beautiful monastery that our Simdells has made for us. You'll see over here on the top left of your screen that we have a little room. There's actually a bed in it, but it's set up to be a beautiful office and library. And that could have been, that actually is a very period touch. And then over now at the top of the middle of the screen and on the right-hand side of the build, you see this other tall space. And that's set up to be an artist studio. Perhaps the monks are doing their illuminated manuscripts there. In a real monastery, that could have been the choir room or the vestry, the place where you keep all of the little bits and pieces that you need to run a service. And as you look down into the church, you can see that they've set up a lovely altar space, and they have a big nave. That's that large central portion where all of the chairs are. And then on either side, they have recreated a colonnade. That's what you call that row of columns, and the hallway on the opposite side of them. And that hallway is actually called the aisle in a church. This space is much bigger than the monks would need, because monks in this kind of monastery and nuns in this kind of monastery that used their church not just for themselves, but usually also for the local people. So you would expect, if you were one of the sisters at this convent, to have a lot of outsiders arrive for various services. Moving a little bit farther, we can see some of the other details of the convent/monastery that the nuns are looking to purchase. You see over there a colonnade that a nun is just coming out of. That's an exterior colonnade. And in general, this big square courtyard is typical of all kinds of convents and monasteries, and then later of universities. And that little space under it, the colonnade of that space, is referred to as the cloister walk. And in fact, this whole enclosure is often referred to as the cloister. Although it wasn't referred to that in English during the Middle Ages, that's actually a term that develops a little bit before the 17th century. You'll notice that Simdells has also provided little cells for the monks or nuns to live in, to have as their own spaces. And that's what they're called. They're not called their rooms, they're called their cells. The two big ones on the right are what actually come with the download, and then I did modify these four a little bit. I took two of the big ones and I turned them into four little ones so that you could see a more realistic size for cells. In this case, Simdells hasn't made them that tiny, probably because you can only fit 8 Sims on a lot, and they've already, even with only having 5 beds in the original build in that section, got as much space as as you can possibly use for any sim. But you see what the cell looks like. You get a bed and you get a dresser. Now, if you want to make more cells for some reason, you've got a little bit more build room here. You see you could extend these rooms out just a little bit. And actually, if you do that, you could put 3 beds. You could get half again as many beds in the space of those where I have those 4. And if we go upstairs, we can see the recreation area of the monks, or at least the sitting areas. You have to have some kind of living room for your family of monks and nuns where they can sit and read and spend time together, because there's not much point in living in community if you don't actually spend time with the other members of the community. And this is a very lovely room. These obviously are a group of monks or nuns that are doing pretty well financially. And if they were medieval monks and nuns, of course, the furniture would look different, but they might have a similar amount of space. As you see over here on the left side of your screen coming up, there is also a lovely, I have to stop using the word lovely, but there's also a bedroom. And actually, to have a big bedroom like this would not be atypical of the Middle Ages, and I'll tell you why in just a second, you see also that we have these workbenches for the monks, because most monks and nuns are supposed, well, pretty much all monks and nuns are supposed to do some kind of labor. And in general, in the Middle Ages, that's physical labor. Here we have another little room. Well, not little, we have another large room. This has desks, and it has bookshelves and a bed. This could be a room for a visiting dignitary, because monasteries and convents did frequently get dignitaries, or it could be, and that other room downstairs could be, a room for a noblewoman or a nobleman who was in kind of political exile, because that's actually often what happened with them. Or it could be a place, especially towards the end of the Middle Ages, where you might have a wealthy widow decide to spend her retirement, and she might live in one of those apartments, and she would still have friends over and live normally, and probably even have servants. This is the kitchen. Normally one would not necessarily have a bar there, and it is also the refectory. Refectory is the fancy church word, the fancy convent monastery word for the dining hall. Just as hanging out together in the communal room is important, so also is eating together. And in fact, what really makes you a religious community is that you eat together and you worship together. There is one additional feature to this build that SimDells has given us that I think many simmers will really enjoy, and that is this long, broad secret passage to get out. This is wide enough that you can use it actually to double as your catacombs, that is, as the place for the tombs of your past monks and nuns, because most convents and monasteries would actually bury their deceased members on site. You can see that it's big enough to store materials in case of the monastery or convent being besieged. And most delightfully of all, you can see that it has a beautiful set of prison cells for us. Now that is historically inaccurate. If you happened to have an inquisitor in your monastery, and it wouldn't have been in the convent because nuns didn't do that, they were not allowed to do that. If you happen to have an inquisitor in your monastery, he would actually work with local officials. You would call in an inquisitor to your site, and he would use your space and your equipment to run his investigations, his inquiries, and indeed any torture that would be done. But of course, if you're going to be torturing Sims, you probably don't really want to also torture yourself with loading screens. So this is an extra and very helpful feature for those who want their medieval monasteries to also have an Inquisition site on an Inquisition spot on site. Now this is the place that we're going to go see in our next video, but for now, that is a teaser.